what does this movement bring to the Democratic Party?
Guys, I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to stand up for a second. You know, look, I got started in New Hampshire, and that had special meaning to me because my father's family has lived in the northern mountains of New Hampshire for generations, like hundreds of years. And my mom's family is from Virginia. She grew up in Baltimore. They moved up there when she was 6 months old. In fact, this afternoon I'll fly out of here because they are renewing their vows tonight, their 50th wedding vows. Tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of Loving versus Virginia, and their marriage 50 years ago was against the law. My mom's home state of Maryland, so she's finally going back to the church that the law barred her from getting married in, wearing the wedding dress that her grandma made her, which she's very proud to still fit 50 years later. So, you know, there we were, and you start traveling with Bernie across this country, and we're making the case. And, you know, in February, I was making the case that all of us of good conscience in this country had to come together to back the candidate who could beat Donald Trump. And they said we were crazy to even talk about Trump, but we were seeing something. And eventually, you know, we had won in Michigan, and we had almost won in Illinois, and now we were headed to Missouri, and I figured if we had gone from Chicago and Detroit, we must be going to St. Louis, but the plane landed, Air Bernie landed, and we looked out the windows, and there wasn't like a 3-story building in sight. And I was like, this ain't St. Louis. Where are we? And Jeff Weaver's like, Ben, we're in the Ozarks. Now, as a black man in America, if you have not yet been to the Ozarks, you ain't exactly rushing to get there. But I was like, come on, let's go. So we get down to Southwest Missouri State University, and you know, it looks a little bit like Detroit, a little bit like Chicago, because we are turning away 7,000 people at the door. And there's 5,000 people packed inside. Get backstage, I pop my head out. And the greatest diversity I see in the room is that 20% of the men are in deer hunting camouflage. And I looked back at Weaver and I said, who's bringing out Bernie tonight? And they said, you are, Ben. And I said, really, this crowd, the best we can do is the former head of the NAACP? And he said, Ben, look, I know this ain't your comfort zone, but just step beyond it. It'll be fine. And you know, that's the best thing any of us can do is step beyond our own comfort zone. And so I go out there and I give my speech, and you know, when I close my eyes in the middle of my speech, I could have been in Detroit, I could have been in Chicago, I could have been in Baltimore. I open it up, yeah, 20% of the men still in deer hunting camouflage. And so I decide that night to just stand backstage and listen to Bernie's speech, because I know what the applause lines are in the inner cities. And as Bernie says, we will win the fight for 15. Cheers go up. Healthcare for all, cheers go up. But I'm getting more anxious, not more affirmed, because we're coming to that place where Bernie would call for the police to stop killing unarmed black men and women. And I knew how loud those cheers were here in Chicago, all we had gone through. And if they were any more tepid in the Ozarks, when all of us were in a dead sprint across this country trying to make sure Bernie won, I knew I would be a little off. In a way you can't afford to be, so I was getting anxious. And then Bernie made the call, and the cheers were just as loud in the Ozarks to stop the killing of unarmed civilians by the police as they were in Chicago, as they were in Detroit. In fact, they were so loud and so sustained, John, I pushed my head through the curtain, and I looked up to the left where all those guys, they must have been in the hunting club, in deer hunting camouflage, were clustered, and half of them were standing on their chairs with their fists in the air. And I really didn't know what to make of it. I knew there were white men who stood for racial justice, but you know, that had cost my father his inheritance. And I didn't think I would find a critical mass in the Ozarks ever, but there they were. Bernie gets off stage, he's running back to get a drink of water. I grab his sleeve, I say, Senator, he says, Ben. I said, did you hear that? He said, hear what? I said, the applause lines, Senator, were exactly the same as they were in Detroit and Chicago, even when you called for the police to stop killing unarmed black men and women. And he said, Ben, I'm glad you stayed to hear that. That's the revolution in this revolution. And that's what each of us is called to be. But here's the other thing, and I want you to pay attention to this, because, you know, groups like Priorities USA are spending a bunch of money polling to try to figure out the obvious. I sat there thinking, what just happened? How did that happen? You know, the Democratic Party is good at this thing called identity politics. But we don't do it with everybody. Because, you know, women, they tell you, well, go talk about the ERA, even though it's the 40th year in a row and we still ain't got a plan, right? And Latinos will say, well, go talk about comprehensive immigration reform. And black folks, maybe it's ending mass incarceration or it's bringing jobs back to the inner city. But though, when it gets to working class white men, we haven't had much to say for like 25 or 30 years since we brought Wall Street into our party. But here's the funny thing. The only thing they want to hear about is restructuring the economy, making it possible for us to all have access to the American dream again, health care for all, ensuring that the minimum wage actually catches up with inflation, making it easier to organize, making things in this country again, a pathway to prosperity, ensuring that all of our kids can afford to go to college without going into debt. And Bernie had done that for half an hour. And just like any other group on the left in the Democratic family, if you spend half an hour talking to folks about their needs and how you're going to address them, well, guess what? When you ask them to be an ally to somebody else, they're ready to do it. Now, here's the rub. As president of the NAACP, you know, I'm mobilized in 2012. Our organization, we were credited with turning out 1.2 million unlikely voters in the black community. The unlikely voters are always the poorest voters in our cities, in our community. When I went home to West Baltimore from the Ozarks, the voters in the neighborhood, my own family members who are reluctant to vote sometimes, they were waiting for the same conversation that the brothers in the Ozarks were waiting for. They were waiting to be told, how are we going to fix these problems? How are we going to bring jobs back? How are we going to make things again? How are we going to make it possible for our kids to go to school? We do that, and we will win. That's what Christine did. That's what Carlos did. That's why Roe was able to go to a very progressive district and take out an incumbent. That's why this nurse will be in Congress.
Brother, that was so good. You were running for governor of Maryland. We are running up against our time limits here, but I do want people to know, I want you to do one thing for me, will you? All right, all right. You think you can do that in Maryland?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, let's be clear.
So
and there's Bill who's running, and there's Danielle who's running. Look, let's be really clear, y'all. Maryland, Bernie won 36% of the vote. This will be a 3- to 8-way race. All I got to do to get to 40, all I have to do is get to 40, and we've won the primary. Now let's talk about the general. Our Republican governor of a state that's 2-to-1 Democrats to Republicans won in a year when there was a the highest tide of Republican turnout we had ever seen and the lowest tide of Democratic turnout we can remember. He won by 60,000 votes in a year when 125,000 Democrats who had voted in 2010 did not show up in 2014. We give folks a reason to turn out. We do what we do best, and we organize, and there's no way that in 2019 Maryland has a Republican governor. But here's the other part, brothers and sisters. I'm an organizer. I've always been a community organizer. I'm the son of organizers. This is not about me becoming governor. This is about making it possible for our families and our movements, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the LGBT equality movement, all of our movements being able to govern, being able to have faith that our government reflects our interests, moves our families forward. This is not me, this is us. This is us.
Brother, ladies and gentlemen, I have a little request for you. Would every one of you please stand up? Come on out of your seats. Brother Ben Jealous, will you go stand? You put your mic down. I want you to stand in the middle of that. I just want you to stand in the middle of that stage. Brother Carlos Ramirez Rosa, I want you to go stand by that man right there. Sister Nagat, I want you to go stand there. Sister Pellegrino, I want you to go stand there. Rokan, I want you to go stand there. Brothers and sisters, I do want these people to turn and look at me. I want them to look at me. And I want this crowd to do what you did last night and give them an incredible round of applause, because, brothers and sisters, in a few years, you're going to want this photo, because just like that photo of Bernie Sanders, this is a photo of the future of our politics. Turn around, brothers and sisters.
Good afternoon, People's Summit. Please proceed to your state breakouts that are starting now. After the state breakouts, the lunch discussion will start at 1:30.